All right. Tonight, I'm going to give you a little cross-cultural sampler, and I think it will serve you well in your future trips and endeavors. And so this was a talk I did for a online university called Rhombus, and they only offer masters in Christian counseling or biblical counseling. And they wanted me to do a series because so many of them are going to interact with people from other cultures and countries, religions, etc., that I did it for them, but I'm going to adjust it for you and your needs. All right, next slide, please. So these are some of the key terms in cultural anthropology. First of all, anthropology, the study of human beings. So it's a very big topic, anything pertaining to human beings. And there's different types of anthropology. Like there's physical anthropology, there's paleoanthropology, there's forensics, but I really love the cultural piece. Race are biological or genetic traits, whereas culture is learned behavior. So race is what you inherit, like through genes and chromosomes, but culture is what you are taught, you learn. Ethnicity, it's almost like a hybrid between race and culture because it's learned behavior, but it's also, it realizes many people that follow the same behavior are also located in similar geographic locations. So you often do get a race component as well. But you could have someone that was biologically Scandinavian, but if they were raised from birth in China, they would be ethnic Chinese, even though their genetics were Scandinavian. Does that make sense? In fact, Miss Korea was from Ukraine? Yeah. But she had been raised and enculturated, and she identified as Japanese. Fascinating. That's right. I forget you guys are out of the what's going on down the mountain. And then she had to resign the next week for issues we won't get into. But anyways, enculturation. This is where you are indoctrinated into the norms, values, and ideals of your culture. So we have all been enculturated by our parents, our churches, our schools, media, radio, our friends. And what enculturation is about, so that is like theological indoctrination, but they're not indoctrinating you with the theology per se, but with what is normal. What is the right way to live, how to behave, how to be proper, how to be modest, la. What's the difference between racism and ethnocentrism? Anyone want to take a shot at that? Yes. Your ethnicity is superior to other ethnicities. That would be ethnocentrism. Judging all other cultures based on your culture would make you ethnocentric. But we are taught, we are enculturated to do exactly that. Because when I say teaching us norms is what is normal. And every culture is indoctrinating you into this is how to dress, this is how to sit, this is how to be polite, this is how to be rude. And so when people aren't acting like us, we immediately judge them based on the standard we were enculturated into. So it takes a lot of self-awareness to get over ethnocentrism. Cultural relativism. This is descriptive rather than prescriptive. And what I mean by that, a cultural relativist is simply describing that different people in different places in different times have different values, norms, and ideals. It's not saying one's better than the other. It's not judging other ones based on other ones. It's just saying in different times, different places, people and cultures are different. Ethical relativism, tag into what we talked about the first night, is prescriptive. And it says When in Rome, do as the Romans. When at Joshua Wilderness Institute, do as the Joshua Wilderness Institutions. When you're down in Harlem, do as the Harlemians, or whatever they're called. And then worldview affects anthropological analysis. And this is the world according to Fred's twisted philosophical mind. This is how I have made a template. And I can pretty much fit anyone into my little graph. And I'm not saying this is the truth or reality. I'm just saying it's a really convenient way for me to navigate when I run into different people and cultures. At the center, we have animism. Anyone know what that worldview is? It's the oldest view we know of according to paleontology and archaeology. What is an animist? You don't necessarily have to worship them. In some ways. Yes.
Does it have something to do with the mind or the soul?
Yes. Can you elaborate more?
I don't know what, I just know that the word is alive.
Oh, very good. Animate, right?
Yeah.
Isn't that like things, non-living things, objects have like spirit or soul?
Yes, for the animist, there is no inanimate object. I would qualify it, though, and I would say an animist believes virtually everything is alive and has a spirit. And the reason I qualify it with virtually is because dead things aren't alive and don't have a spirit. And they're dead precisely because the spirit is no longer connected to the tree, the rock, the pen you're writing with, the couch you're sitting on, the pillars holding up the building, the animals, the trees, the sky, the rivers, you, me.
Is animism like the whole spirit animal thing? Like a spirit animal?
Yep. Right. So you'll see this in a lot of indigenous cultures, native cultures, and I've talked to a lot of my missionary friends who actually believe this is the largest religion in the world, even larger than Christianity. And what they believe has happened is as Christian and Muslim and Buddhist missionaries come into places, they're like putting a veneer over the top of these core animistic beliefs. So the people are still actually animist, they're just using the lingo of a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Christian. And I found that really fascinating to think about. Animism, though, it's a really kind of rough way to live. If you had to like supplicate or make sure you weren't offending all the different spirits, like I would still probably be supplicating the spirits of this room and may not even get to my talk for another hour because I want to make sure all the pillars are cool, the windows are cool, the ceiling, the floor, the furniture, all the implements, because I don't want to have any hostile spirits in my teaching environment. And this kind of evolved or merged in many cultures into polytheism, the belief in many gods. So some of the spirits, like say the spirit of the volcano was elevated to a god of Vulcan, or the spirit of the ocean to Poseidon, or the spirit of the sky and storms to Zeus, and the spirit of fertility and beauty to Aphrodite, etc. So you get a multiplicity or a pantheon of gods, like elevated spirits. And then the three major worldviews we see today are theism, a belief in a god, in a pantheism, the belief that all is God, and naturalism, materialism, that believes there is no God, only the physical material world and things. But there's also hybrid positions. So in between people who only believe in the physical material world and people who believe in God, we have the deist. People who believe in God, but also believe in his immanence in the world would be all in God. Panentheists, like we talked about the other night. And then this is a really interesting one called scientific pantheism. And this is where you have materialist and pantheist believing that they're talking about the same thing, they're just using different language. A pantheist might be calling it spirit, and a materialist might be calling it energy. but they believe they're talking about the same thing. So you'll see a lot of this in sort of the New Age sort of, or kind of new physics, things like that. Next slide. So depending on where you are in this chart, it's going to affect how you judge, how you evaluate. One more distinction I want to make on this. Theism is dualistic in the sense it believes in both a spirit realm, my dyslexia kicking in, a material realm, and a spiritual realm. The pantheists believe the physical material world is illusion, whereas the naturalist materialists believe spirit is a fantasy. Theists kind of straddle these two views in that they believe in both a physical and a material world. All right. So enculturation, indoctrination. From a very young age, children mimic and idealize those older than them. And so here's two kind of extreme examples of a Western young girl kind of imitating her older sister or very young mother. And here we have, I think it's a Surrey woman who's imitating her elder. They're not allowed to pierce their lips until they reach a certain age, probably puberty. And then, but they're already practicing or like playing for the day that they get to have lip plates too. In our culture, often a beautiful woman can attract a high-income breadwinner, and I have met people in Southern California, especially in like La Jolla and Del Mar, where it was just understood. The man could expect to have a fit, beautiful, engaged woman who's going to manage the kids in the household, and as long as she holds up that end of the bargain, he'll support her. But if she gets fat, ugly, or bored, he might get a younger, prettier wife. And the same for her. She might be saying, as long as you're keeping me in the lifestyle to which I've become accustomed, I'm going to be here, I'm going to fulfill my role. But if you lose your job, you go bankrupt, I'm going to find me somebody else. In this culture, size, they have bride wealth associated with marriage. So you have to pay the fathers or the brothers in cattle for the woman. And depending on the size of the lip plate, you get more cows. So a young girl that really loved her father or family would try to get the biggest lip plate she could because that would be her parents' retirement and take care of them. If you didn't like your dad, you might just say, I ain't doing that whole lip plate thing, Daddy-o. Sorry. Fascinating. Next slide. Culture assigns us all roles. Think about here at Joshua. There's like this incredible hierarchy up here on the mountain, right? And when you look at the camp in general, you have your director, and then you have your different ministry heads, and all the way up tier where we have Joshua, right? And then we have our whole different hierarchy up here. Where do you guys think you all are at the Hume hierarchy? Yes. Roles can be based on gender, age, skill set, caste, class, and need. Fascinating. Anyone know the difference between caste and class? Caste, yeah, go for it. There you go. You're born into it, and in most cultures that have it, you can't move up or down until you die. Well, you can move down before you die, but you can't move up until after you die. Class is much more fluid. You could rise or fall in class depending on wealth, connections, whatever the economy of your culture is saying is status and which is not. Need could be in the sense of, among a lot of the indigenous tribes, which were more egalitarian, instead of having like a king or a head permanent chief, you might have temporary chiefs or leaders based on need. If it was time to move the band to the next hunting ground, maybe the person who was best with directions or who knew the routes, where the watering holes were, where the grazing land was, they would be the leader for that trip. But then maybe the person who was good at organizing and setting up would now take charge for the setup of the new location. And then maybe someone was an excellent hunter. He would be the leader for the hunting band. Maybe a baby was being born and a woman would come to the lead role as the midwife or medicine woman or something of that. So that's what I mean by need could change your role, and then you would go back into the group. You would come to lead, then go back into the group. All right, next. Sex and gender. Sex is biological. It has to do with genes and chromosomes, male and female. Gender is cultural. You learn your gender. In other words, your culture tells you what it is to be masculine or feminine. And it is different, wildly different, depending on where you go. Many cultures have non-binary gender categories, such as two-spirit or transgender distinctions. There are at least 72 recognized gender, according to medicinenet.com. California currently recognizes 3 genders. Like next time you get your driver's license, you can choose to be either male, female, or non-binary. And then we have cis and trans. Do you all know what those terms mean? I hope so at this point. I sure didn't the first time I heard them. Did you get an answer from all that? Okay, Cis is when your identity matches your biology. So I feel like a male, and I am in a biological male's body. So I would be cis. If I felt like a woman and found myself in this body, I would be trans. Okay? It's where your ideation does not match your biology. That would be trans. Okay? Is everyone on board with these definitions, or would someone like to challenge or debate them? Where you're not declaring that you're male or female. Some people, one of the 72 is fluid. Some people actually identify with different genders throughout the day or week. It's rare, but it has been documented and recorded. A person may wake up feeling like a woman. Around noon, they feel more masculine. Maybe towards evening, they feel like a woman again. And maybe by bedtime, they go to sleep as a man. If you don't like these definitions, tell me now. Because it's just going to build from here.
For gender is cultural, you're not saying, are you saying like there's more than one gender in general?
No, I'm saying your gender is telling you what the appropriate way to be a man or a woman is. California, I think it was about 15 years ago, passed a law saying gender was biological. And I think the intention behind it was they thought it would offer more protections for gay and trans people if you were like born with it, right? Kind of like race, rather than it being a choice or a learned behavior. But I don't find it helpful. I think it is cultural, and it doesn't help to say it's biological. So let's go to the next slide. I don't know who made this, but I have been enjoying this for years because it really helps when having this conversation. And whether you agree with this or not, I didn't have my PowerPoint, so I had to steal it off of videos I made and take screenshots. I know. Oh, it's even got my little. Okay, so what they're trying to do is distinguish between how we think of ourselves, how we ideate, versus who we're attracted to, and we're talking romantically, sexually, what our biology is. You know, are you XX, XY, or maybe XXY chromosomes? That would make you male, female, or intersex. And expression is how you present yourself. Right? Okay. And so I find this really helpful in having this conversation about gay, trans, LGBT sorts of questions and issues. And your cultures are going to have a lot to do with this sort of thinking. I also like how it's kind of like, it's set up to be like a sliding scale. It's not like a either or, black or white, all in or all out. It could be like, yeah, I'm feeling, 90% masculine. Maybe I got a 10% feminine side in there or whatever. Gender expression, same thing. I might feel masculine most of the time, but I don't mind loosening up every once in a while. And then biological sex, that is simply comes down to, it's not about feelings, it's about genes and chromosomes. And that's where a lot of conservatives get hung up on this topic. They only want to focus on the biology, and they're missing the head and the heart piece that go with it. And then finally, the expression piece, and the heart piece, they're the sexual orientation piece. That's like who you're attracted to. Or if you're a male, attracted to females and vice versa. That's hetero, which means other. Homo means same, if you're attracted to the same gender or sex. And intersex would be people that actually, bisexual would be both. But there's way more than bisexual, right? Good Lord. Pansexual, what's that? Yep. All.
All genders.
All.
So are you attracted to a sex or a gender? Because if there's only two sexes, or I guess.
That's a good question. I realized I did a slip of the tongue, and then I started thinking the same thing. It's a good question. Because I could see it could go both ways, sort of, in a way. Where you might be attracted to a gender more than a biological sex of a person. Like, you might be attracted to someone that's feminine, but you might not be attracted to a female. So you might be attracted to a effeminate male. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, it does make sense.
Okay, good. What's that? Yes, those are people with biological, they're not XX or XY. And even though it's rare, and I would have this discussion with my very conservative pastor buddy all the time. And whenever I would try to have this conversation, he would just say, male and female, created he them. And I'd be like, yeah, Steve, that was in the garden. We're a long way from Eden, and a lot has broken since then, including the human genetic code. And there are people, small percentage of the population, but there are people that have XXY, XXXY, there's an X. A lot of these don't survive long, but there are people, in the past they were called hermaphrodites, but that's kind of gone out of vogue. It's very rare to have someone with fully functional male and female genitalia, but it has happened. In ancient times, they were either seen as a curse or a special blessing from the gods, both ends of the spectrum. like this is a special anointed one, or we need to get rid of this. It's corrupt, deformed, and probably everything in between. I think probably most people that are intersex, it's something they probably choose to present themselves as one or the other, and they probably keep it to themselves because that's kind of a personal thing, right? But where's the place in the kingdom for those people, right? And if they don't fit into your nice little binary male or female, created he, them, when you're actually maybe a 30-70 or a 50-50 split. It's more likely it's going to be like something like 10-90 or 20-80, but sometimes it's much closer. Yeah.
Hinduist culture, you were saying yesterday, or last night, that like a lot of the gods had both like masculine and kind of feminine attributes to them.
Or they had consorts that represented the female side.
Yeah. So like, did Hinduist culture, if like intersex was to happen to a person, like, did they see that as a blessing?
I tend to think in Hinduism that person would probably be revered as a deity, would be my guess. Often children with birth defects, like born with multiple limbs and stuff, because of their iconography, they're seen as incarnations of the divine. So a hermaphrodite, I would assume, would be like, wow, this is...
Is there like a physical difference between like someone with X, someone with XXY, and XXXY? Yeah.
Well, yes. It's in your genes and chromosomes to the cellular level. And this is interesting when we do talk about like people that do go through like sex conversion or actually do surgery and things like that. What they can change is the appearance maybe of their breast and muscle mass and body hair and even genitalia. But you have to remember those XY chromosomes go to the cellular level. They are in every cell of your body with a nucleus. And so, I mean, I want to empathize with the struggle those folks are going through, but those type of surgeries and stuff, even though they're extreme and dramatic at times, it's not even close to what it would take to actually change you biologically from a male to a female. You would have to do it at the cellular level.
Yeah. I mean, like, is there a, like, can you tell the difference physically between someone with XY and XXXY?
Not necessarily. I mean, look at the range in this room of people that are probably even just XX or XY. And you have some XX people that might be more or less feminine on the scale, etc. I mean, you can, anyways. Speak up a little for my old ears.
If someone did the surgeries and also like hormonal treatment,
Yes,
would that fall under gender expression?
I think it would. How you're presenting yourself. Can anyone tell me the difference between a transsexual and a transvestite? No, they mean two different things. Transsexual and transvestite. Yeah, think vestment. That's how I remember. Vestments, vestite. So they could be straight, they could be gay, they could be whatever. They're simply dressing in the opposite of their biological sex or gender. And the transsexual is someone like that actually does not identify with their biology. That would be a transsexual. Transvestite might just be like a female impersonator or something, or a woman dressing up like a guy. Yeah, like drag. That would be transvestite. Any other questions? Man, the times must be changing because usually this really upsets people. You guys seem completely unfazed. What?
We're gonna be going to LA. We're gonna see this quite a.
Well, I mean, yeah, we see it at metro station.
All right. Well, next slide. Culture defines marriage and determines number and type of spouses. It also assigns roles in marriage. Monogamy means you're married to one person. Group marriage is where multiple people are married together. Polygamy is having more than one spouse at a time. Serial polygamy is having multiple spouses in sequence. Polygyny is a man with multiple wives, and polyandry is a woman with multiple husbands. Isn't that great? Serial polygamy is actually the leading form of marriage in the United States of America at this time.
No way.
Yeah. It's where you have many spouses over your lifetime, but only one at a time in sequence.
Did they do that intentionally?
Hopefully not. Hopefully people don't get married with the intention of getting divorced and having another spouse. But I suppose some people do.
So, this is more a question that I kind of was curious about personally. So like serial polygamy, is that like if the person's spouse dies and then they remarry like multiple times over their life, is that a serial polygamist?
Yes.
So like it doesn't matter about
Yep. So, based on these, well, let me just ask you this. Can you give me a universal definition of marriage that would apply to all people, all places, at all times? Good answer. I would drag it out, but that's the correct answer. Even my cultural anthropology book just like said uncle in the they said there's too many wildly diverse marriage customs and ideas throughout the history of the world and in this current time that we're not even going to try. We're just going to give you a list of some of the ones that we have observed in the world. But can you guys give me a biblical definition of marriage? Can we at least do that?
The union of a man and a woman. No? It's not wrong. You can say it's wrong. It's okay. Why is it wrong, Lucy?
What's that?
according to the Bible, it's isn't it like two becoming one flesh? What God has put together, let no man tear apart. Kind of the idea of that.
Yeah, that's in the Bible.
So it's the two.
There's a lot of other stuff in the Bible too.
Fred, wait, was mine wrong?
It's not wrong, but it's not complete.
Union of a man and woman under God. Is that right?
So if people don't have a religious marriage, they're not married?
Okay. Wait, I thought you said according to the Bible.
I did. What is marriage according to the Bible? What's a biblical marriage?
One man and one woman. The union of one man and one woman. Above the age. No, I'm just kidding. I don't think that's in the Bible.
Did you mean one or more women?
No, the union of one man to one woman.
But the Bible's full of polygamy.
Well, but in 1 Corinthians, doesn't it say, like, take care of your, like, husband, take care of your wife?
Ephesians says, love your wives in the Lord, for this is right. It does. Husbands, love your wives.
Wait, just wait.
No,
Just
where
because,
does it say love your wife?
In Ephesians 5.
but Fred, if multiple wives.
I don't know. Look.
Great.
Come on. Verses are a later addition to the Bible. Come on.
What about Adam and Eve? Fred,
Yeah, well, what about Adam's first wife?
Adam didn't have a first wife. That's not his wife.
You don't know about Lilith?
But that's not biblical.
No,
I
but
was added on. Well, it's not in the Bible.
Who's Tabitha? Well, didn't Paul say that it's better not to marry?
True. I'm with Paul right now.
We're all with Paul
Or
right now.
that I literally am the bride of Christ, collectively as the church and even individually? Jesus is my spouse. I am married to Christ. Oh my God, is that homosexual?
So you went to Ephesians 5. It says, husbands, so multiple husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, not them.
Nice grammar usage. Do you know the parable of the 10 virgins?
Yeah, but that wasn't. Those virgins were betrothed.
They weren't what?
They weren't betrothed. Is that Matthew 25?
What do you mean they weren't betrothed? They were going to be married to the same groom.
They're concubines, right? Or was it
I'm pretty sure it's not indicating.
When it says virgins, it just means like maiden too.
Right, but that's not the point. They were all headed to marry the same groom. 3 of them had oil and 7 did not. And they were not invited into the wedding.
Fred, what's your definition of biblical marriage? You just said we're a bride married to Christ, right?
Wasn't that talking about like how marriages were back in the day, how the husband would leave and build the house and then come back to the wife?
That could be part of it. There were multiple women in this scenario. The multiple churches, the 7 churches. Right? Well, I don't know about that, but
I think the women are referring to like the individual of like the bride of like people instead of not necessarily just a woman per se. So it's like the bride of the church more so. It's talking to me ready as an individual to be ready for the coming.
are there any biblical injunctions against having multiple wives?
Yes, at least for kings. There is one for deacons and overseers.
No, they can have multiple wives. They're not to multiply wives.
Wait, what? How does that happen?
David had like 37 wives. Solomon had 700. That's multiplying. That's out of control. Yes. Oh, definitely. It's definitely biblical. I don't know that I'd say it's a good idea, but it's definitely biblical.
I'd say it's ideal to have one man, but
It would be ideal.
like overseers and deacons, like First Timothy, that is husband wife. But
Yes.
Garden of Eden is one man and one woman. So that's like the standard, really, the best.
I would agree with that. But if you're going into a culture that practices polygamy and you start throwing down this, oh, you're living in sin and yada, 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 I think you might want to check yourself for a minute. Because the Bible is full of patriarchs and godly people that had multiple wives. And God used those to bring about the very Messiah. There's a really interesting case study in Papua New Guinea where the tribes were polygamist. I think Don Richardson, Eternity in Their Hearts. Are you familiar with that book? Really interesting. Where he believes every culture has within themselves kind of like the hidden gospel. And so as you learn about cultures, you can find things about their past and tradition to try to help explain what Jesus did. And so in this particular culture, and this is going to sound kind of creepy, but I think it's important for you to be aware of this. So the older men would trade their daughters that had come of marriageable age to the other old men in the tribe for brides. So they kept getting these young girls as brides. And the young men in the tribe had no women that they could marry, because these old men had monopoly on all the women that they were producing with their wives, and then they would trade their daughters to each other to have more wives. And when they converted to Christianity, The missionaries didn't tell them, you need to knock this off, you need to stop. But it was actually under the conviction of the Holy Spirit that these older men felt that what they were doing was wrong. Not to have multiple wives, but what they were doing to the young men in the tribe, their own greed, how they were using people, not taking care of and nurturing people. And to me, I think that's incredibly fascinating. Yep.
I was just gonna ask a question. If biblically we could husbands, men can have multiple wives, what's like the line? What's the difference between women having multiple husbands?
I'm sorry, that's not biblical.
Fair enough.
I'm just saying, is that sexist? It sure sounds sexist to me. But you don't find any biblical accounts of women having multiple husbands. Now, culturally, there are some tribes, I know some groups in Nepal where the woman has multiple husbands, but it's economic. And it's not like she's the queen and she has these multiple husband servants. It's usually brothers that they don't want to divide the land because they have such small land to begin with, that instead of them splitting it and both having a smaller share, the 2 or 3 brothers will take a wife together. And so the wife will have multiple husbands of the brothers. And when they have children, they don't worry about which of the brothers was the father because they see themselves as one collective family unit. Yeah. Usually polygamy is economic. It's not some guy just wanting to have a huge harem of women and all this sort of thing. It usually has to do with, remember, in a lot of cultures where there is not the amount of equality that's here in America, and it may not be completely equal, but compared to a lot of places in the world, women are dependent on their fathers and then their husbands for protection, economic security, children, all of that stuff. And so it's usually for economic reasons, not out of lust or sexual. Yes.
So I see the cultural relevance with marriage, but are we talking about biblical as in it happened, or what is the right way of marriage? Like what is the godly? Are you asking what attributes to godly marriage?
Yeah.
So in Genesis, where it says, a man shall leave his father and cling to his wife, singular. You can argue that it is biblical that to have multiple wives, which the Bible definitely asks people to have multiple wives and concubines. But you can also say that wasn't righteous or godly, even though you have all these men who are put in Hebrews 11. Also in
Are you saying Abraham wasn't righteous?
no, I'm saying like that isn't what God had intended for marriage to be. Like
Well, without Abraham having multiple wives.
well, when it comes to the godly marriage that we're talking about between Jesus and the church, it is Jesus and the church one. If Jesus had multiple, I don't believe that would be.
Who's Yahweh married to?
Well, the church is the bridegroom of Christ.
Who's Israel married to? Thank you. So is God a polygamist? Now, if you're Reformed, it's easy peasy because the church and Israel are the same. And so God's not a polygamist. But if you're not Reformed, it seemed like Israel was God's bride, and then the church became God's bride. Or was Israel the Father's bride, and the church is the Son's bride, and the Spirit's bride is yet to come that we have not yet seen?
I also have another question where it says, when he talks about deacons, the church,
Yes.
they should only have one wife. Would that be? Is that like if you can't be a deacon if in other cultures if
That's a really great question. How would you all address that? You go into a culture, you like that Papua New Guinea example I brought you. Does that mean, and remember, the most powerful, probably the most educated, probably the wisest people in the tribes are also the ones with the most wives. Are they now barred from church leadership, or do they have to let wives go? But that doesn't seem like a right solution either, does it? Here, these women and their children are dependent on you, but you want to be a deacon or a preacher, so you're going to let these people fend for themselves. Or do they just have to pass out and say the younger people are going to have to be in church leadership? I mean, that's a great practical question, and that's why I want us to have this talk. So when you go into these cultures, you just can't wear your American idea of Christianity and marriage and all of that and just now expect the rest of the world to jump in line, especially when your own Bible is describing how they're living. Yeah.
So, I mean, when it comes to like, I don't know if this is like fair to say, but when it comes to like marriage and in that situation where, I guess I'll ask first, like, are we assuming that the people who want to be, let's say in this case, like that want to be a deacon or a pastor or preacher, whatever it may be within the church, um, like, are we saying that, man, what's happening? Like, man, I had this. I'm sorry. Actually, I'm just gonna ask a different way. So,
Okay.
like, can, when you said that we're crucified with Christ, or that we're made a new creation, but then Christ doesn't pick up our cross and like every day, um, like, would caring for those extra lives kind of fall under that, in a sense of like picking up your cross and following him, because like our old self is dead, our part of the old life. Now that they're saved, does that not still become qualification in a sense? Because like is that kind of what we're saying here? Like it's not necessarily wrong.
Are you saying like if they
Like if they
came to Christ with multiple wives, that would be okay, but if they were saved and only had one wife, they shouldn't take another one if they want to be in church leadership?
yeah, I guess that's what I'm kind of saying. Like, are we
I think that's reasonable, but I don't think it's biblical. It's a reasonable qualification to my mind, what you just said, but that's not what the Bible says. The Bible simply says if you want to be elder or deacon, you need to be the husband of one wife. Does that mean you have to be married to be an elder or deacon? Well, if you don't have one wife, some churches teach that. You have to be married to be elder or deacon. I don't think that's what that means personally, but you could see how difficult these questions become. And this is just in our own culture, let alone when you start seeing all these different arrangements. Yes. I'm sorry. You first, and then I'll come back to you.
What I don't know if the Bible specifically says no, like polygamy, but I mean God does warn Solomon about having multiple wives.
Yeah, Solomon was out of control.
That is true.
Yep.
You said that there was no place in the Bible where a wife has multiple husbands.
Not that I'm aware of.
What about the woman at the well?
You know what?
The Samaritan?
Oh, she was a serial polygamist.
Okay, it says, you were right in saying I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands. So does that mean like
I've always assumed they were in sequence, not collectively.
still like a form of polygamy?
It is, but it's not polyandry. It would be serial polygamy. I don't know of any I don't know of any polyandry in the Bible. Okay.
Where specifically does it say that it's like, because you're saying that it's not unbiblical to have polygamy or like to have multiple spouses at one time, right?
And by that I mean it's in the Bible, so you can't say it's unbiblical.
But, huh? But, like by saying that, it kind of, like by saying just because polygamy is in the Bible doesn't mean it's not biblical, but there's also things like.
But it's in the Bible non-condemned. Abraham was never condemned for having multiple wives. Jacob was never condemned for having multiple wives.
So that makes it okay?
Well, I would think if it was a problem, God would have said so. Don't you?
But doesn't it say to like be of one, like to be one flesh with like one person? So how can like if you have multiple wives be one flesh with one person?
Well, I guess it would be consecutively. But I wouldn't exactly know. Yeah, go ahead.
Would you say it's more godly to, if there's like a younger woman and a man who already has a wife, and that young woman has no other options, and the only thing that would protect her was to get married, and that was the only man available, would it be more godly to take her in marriage than leave her out?
Like as compassion?
Yeah.
Perhaps. I mean, you could see someone thinking that, right? That's a very reasonable thought. And I mean, like you're sacrificing yourself and your domestic tranquility by bringing another woman into the home because you don't want her to go into prostitution or die of starvation or whatever.
And along those lines is like the possible allowance of polygamy, similar to how Jesus does allow for divorce, but it's not like the design, the ideal. Is that how you would understand it?
Yes, it's because of the hardness of their hearts that he allowed for divorce. Just real quickly, what about remarriage? Remarriage. What is the biblical justification for remarriage? Yeah.
I can't quote the scripture on the dot, but I think it's the standard for it is like if you're burning with passion, then you should remarry. I think is what it says.
No.
What?
That's 1 Corinthians 7. And there, let me help you out. There's only one biblical qualifier to remarry. If your spouse is dead, you are free to remarry. Those whose spouse is not dead and they remarry, what does the Bible call it? How many people in our evangelical churches are divorced and remarried?
A lot of them.
At least 50%.
At least 50?
Yep. Yes.
That's wild.
Yes. So was that for back then and not for now? How do we deal with that? Do you see how powerful culture is and even how we interpret the Bible? This is what I'm trying to get you guys to see. I'm not trying to promote polygamy or anything like that. I'm just trying to get you to understand we get so tapped into being brought up a certain way by our parents, our church, our culture, that when I ask a question like polygamy, it's just a knee-jerk reaction, no. But now when I bring it back to something like divorce, all of a sudden it gets really uncomfortable because the Bible's really clear on it. But I bet you we could go down to the Bible bookstore or the bookstore down the hill here, and we could find Christian authors giving reasons why you can remarry, reasons why you shouldn't remarry, and probably everything in between. At least I know that's how it was in my college bookstore. And you're just like, God, what's going on? I thought we were all using the same Bible.
Let's say you talked about like the patriarchs and how like they had some polygamy and how it wasn't like condemned. I would disagree on the matter of Jacob when he marries the two sisters, because if you go to like Leviticus 17, it doesn't allow you to marry two sisters.
Leviticus 17 doesn't allow you?
Yeah.
I learned something new today. Thank you. Awesome. I did not know that.
Doesn't allow you for what?
Repeat that, Bandor?
I don't have my Bible on me.
Leviticus 17?
Well, I'm going to look for it, but I never heard that.
Wait, for what?
Yeah, if you find it, read it for us. That would be interesting. But he would have done it before the law. So he is probably cool there. Yeah, read it, please.
And you shall not take a wife as a rightful wife to his sister, uncovering her nakedness while her sister is still alive.
Seems like a good rule to me. Can you imagine? All right, next slide. Yes.
So, based on what we were talking about before, is there justification for multiple marriages for like Mormons and stuff? Like, is that okay?
Yes, in fact, there is a huge polygamy web ring. When you get off the mountain and you can surf the internet again, I would recommend checking it out. And it is almost all Christian, but if you dig a little deeper, they usually turn out to be Mormons.
Web ring? Like a dating app?
No, it's like links like sites together. So it's like a ring of sites. And the topic is polygamy. And almost all the polygamous websites that I've searched for in this country are all Christian. They're not Hindu, they're not Muslim, they're Christian polygamous websites. These are all, once again, I did not make this chart, but I have really enjoyed using it. And I think the person who made it was trying to cast shade and disparage the Bible. But this is all in the Bible, people, so you might want to become aware so you can address it because someone will probably bring it up to you, like, what about yada yada? So there's the classic you gave me right out the chute, one man, one woman, Genesis 2:24. But then we have a man, wives, plus concubines. We have a man and a woman's property, a man, a woman, and a woman, polygamy, a levirate marriage where a dead husband is replaced by a living brother or relative, a rapist and his victim. This is the hardest of all of them for me to even think about. I have tried to come at this from every angle I can conceive of, and it just is mind-searing to me that this is a biblical teaching. A male soldier could rape a prisoner of war, and if she was pleasing to him, he could take her to wife. If he's decided, nah, I don't want this one, he had to let her go free. Once again, I cannot wrap my 21st century California mind around that scripture. I don't even try to do an apology or defend these. And a male slave and a female slave, like the master had complete control and authority over them. He could marry them together. He could have sexual relationships with them. I mean, it was just amazing. They were property.
Are most of these like examples of these views taken from like the New Testament?
Yes. These are all from the Old Testament. And so that might be one of your apologetic defenses is that was the law. We're living under grace and truth. That was because of the heinousness and brutality of the time. But I don't want to even try to mentally do the gymnastics to figure out how being able to marry your rape victim works out. I mean, that now there is a qualifier though, and that might be the answer. He could never divorce her. So maybe that was the payoff. Here's a woman who can basically do whatever she wants, and the man can never divorce her. That's his price to pay for the assault. But once again, that doesn't quite work in my mind with equity.
Even though it's absolutely terrible, just that whole situation with the rape, like the rape victim and the rapist, I think I was talking to Lizzie, and back in those times, I think it would be better to take the woman to wife and take care of her rather than just putting her out in the streets, because no one will ever want, like back in those times, no one would want her, no one would, like she would just be like totally disregarded.
Well, I'm glad you said that and not me.
It's terrible to think about that.
It is. And I don't even want to think about it anymore.
But
Next slide. Okay, well, we won't go here yet. Let me just pause for a minute. The whole point of that marriage thing, I'm not trying to tell you what biblical marriage is or isn't. What I'm trying to get you to see is how powerful culture has affected your thinking in making you so certain about how certain things should be. That's the point of why I'm having this discussion. Okay? If you want to know my personal opinions about marriage, I'll be happy to talk to you apart from this. And I have some opinions. But that's just my opinion. I want you to see culture, and when you enter into another culture, remember, you're the one who is not normal. You are the one who is acting out of bounds. And so it's important to find out where cultures... Before you travel anywhere, I would always recommend just doing at least a surfacey guide of the norms of that culture, how to dress, especially in gender roles, right? Because if you're an American woman, going to Turkey might be a shocker for some of you, and some of the limitations. Even though it's a westernized Muslim country, it's supposed to be a secular state, there's still a very strong Islamic influence with their mores, their norms, their ideas of what's modest, what's not, even eye contact, body language, how you dress, how you walk, whether you're alone, whether you're in a group. All these things are really important to keep in mind when you're traveling, whether it's in LA or abroad. Okay. I want to pivot now to show you how differently cultures deal with death and dying and burying the dead. And this is another one that just really trips me out. The Inuit culture would put the old people that could no longer contribute, either voluntarily or involuntarily, on an ice floe and be like, it was good having you, Granny. We'll see you in the happy hunting grounds. You probably can't read it, but in the fuzzy print it says, we may not have enough ice floes for the boomers. Now what's a little more fun is the Yanomamo culture in the Amazon practice Indo-cannibalism. Anyone want to take a guess at what Indo-cannibalism is? Yes, but what's the Indo part? Indo is like inside. So the reason they're eating the dead isn't for nutrition or anything like that. It's they want to keep that person in the tribe. And the way to do that is to consume them into yourself so that they become a part of you. Indo-cannibalism.
they don't work for us either.
Yeah, you probably haven't seen that at Joshua before, huh? Anyways, a lot of these cultures will burn the bodies and then turn the bones into powder, and then they'll ceremoniously drink the dead, like a communion of the dead. Other cultures, Leviticus 19, I think, talks about the tattooing. And where they would actually tattoo the ashes of the dead into their flesh, and the same idea to keep them with the group, with the tribe, so they wouldn't be lost out there. And this is an animistic culture that is practicing this. To me, there's a type of beauty of it, but it's also very pagan. You can see this idea of trying to keep the spirits of the departed with the group, with the tribe. My family is such pagans, I swear. We lost one of my nephews about, has it been 10 years now? Maybe. But they had him cremated, and his mother and his siblings started talking about, we should get him tattooed into us. And I was like, oh my God. I'm not opposed to tattoos. But if you're going to go with biblical injunctions, that's exactly the type of tattoos I think that is being told not to do. Not like Mom or Jesus loves me, but tattooing your dead relatives into your flesh to keep them. It's like a type of sympathetic magic, I think. Okay, next slide. In some indigenous American tribes, they believe you continue in the afterlife in the same body you died in. You like pick up where you left off. So think about the implications of that. You don't want to die too old, right? Because you're going to spend eternity in the state your body was in. And so you don't want to die too young, not too old. But if you start getting trouble walking and missing some teeth and your vision's getting a little fuzzy, you might want to think about it's time to check out. In the Hinduism, the reincarnation, you come back and begin from like infancy. And I love this picture. You see the life force going from the child as he develops through the man, adulthood, old age, death, and then a new life starts on and on and on. So for them, it doesn't matter how old you are when you die. You're just going to start off. But if you believe you're going to come back in the body you died in, then that's going to change your thinking. Probably you're not going to do long-term convalescent home care for your auntie or your mother. You're going to be like, no, Mom, we're doing this today because we want to see you happy and healthy still in the next life. Next. See, the intention could be the same, loving of the elders, but how we help them die or not die could be very dependent on worldview and culture. Egyptian resurrection versus Christian resurrection. The Egyptians believed in bodily resurrection, but in that very body that died. Not a glorified body, and that's why they went through such pains to preserve and embalm the bodies. And they would put the organs in jars, and they would fill the tomb with artifacts that the person could use. Food, clothes, chairs, entertainment, slaves, pets, horses, all these sorts of things. And they would be embalmed too, like they embalm pets and cats and all sorts of stuff. In Christian resurrection, we believe there is a bodily resurrection, but into a glorified body. And the theology is a little tough for me as a philosopher on bodily resurrection. Catholics, as you know, are really big on being buried in sacred, consecrated ground. And if you're not saved or not in the right place, you can't be buried in the churchyard. You have to be buried out somewhere else. But how do you have bodily resurrection when my body is made up of probably other bodies by this point in human history that have died, decomposed, gone back into the earth, turned into plants, into grains or fruit, or which I have consumed and is now part of my molecular structure? Or what about people that die at sea and their body is consumed by fishes and sharks and pooped out, or the salmon is eaten, and so on and so forth. So not that I'm worried about God can't deal with that. It's just a real mind twister for my philosophy. Next slide. Oh, I really like this one. Tibetan sky burial. It's almost like a Pavlovian response. I don't know if they still practice this, but this was an ancient tradition, and I personally think it's really beautiful. And when a person died, they would burn juniper branches, and it would attract the vultures. And these vultures are huge, these Himalayan vultures. They're like as tall as me, like squatted down like this. And, well, you see them with this one. Sorry. And the person will chop the body up with a cleaver into like hand-sized chunks, and these vultures will be surrounded with people, and they will feed them the chunks, and then as the vultures fly away and soar to the sky, they believe the spirit is released. In our culture, cremation has become a very common and cost-effective way of dealing with the dead. Even in my lifetime, most Christians would not cremate because they thought that's only what pagans did, like Vikings, and you burned witches and you burned evil people. My dad was like really adamant about, I want to be buried in a casket, I don't want to be burned. And so I was like, yeah, sure, Dad. Yeah. But he did not believe he was his body or anything else. It's just, it was his preference, and I think he mellowed out a little as he got older.
Would you ever want a Viking funeral?
Oh, sure. Who would not want a Viking funeral? But actually, I really like the Native American idea of where they would put the dead on scaffolds, and the birds would come and take away the flesh, and after a amount of time, all that would be left is the bones, and then they would collect the bones and put them into clefts in the rocks in the mountains. And I don't know, there's a type of I don't like the idea of being like formaldehyded and separated from nature. I have eaten stuff my whole life. I would like other things to get to eat me when I'm done. Seems fair, right? And I'm not this is just a vehicle. This isn't me. So who I am is safe and secure wherever I'm going. With what happens is, and I've let my nephews know this, but I don't want them to go to jail or anything. So if they can fulfill my wishes, they'll do it. But I think if you got caught taking a body of an old timer out into the desert, there might be questions or an inquiry. Okay, next slide. Traditional American with the casket, and often they'll be put in like cement crypts and sealed so nothing can decay them, or put in mausoleums. And this one is starting to come into vogue, which I'm pretty happy about this. Like, why have cemeteries? Why not have parks and orchards? Which kind of goes full circle back to my pagan ancestors, the Celts. And Celtic cemeteries were graveyards because you would plant fruit trees on the graves of the dead. And you could go by and visit grandma or grandpa and eat an apple or a peach and like commune. Isn't that beautiful? I think it is. Do I have any more, or is that my last slide? All right, so I hope it certainly was entertaining, I know. I love anthropology. I always called it my circus class because you guys were the most calm group I have ever taught this content to. Yes. No, a lot of times people get really offended. Yes, just any question about their ideas of marriage or gender or how people should be buried or things like that. But these are just 3 topics. We didn't talk about religion or education, or we talked a little bit about gender roles in society, but not that much. And like I said, when you leave the Western world, you could be quite a shocker. And so do some study, prepare yourself. But I believe the more you know about cultures, and I would recommend that book, Don Richardson, Eternity in Their Hearts. He also wrote another book called Peace Child. And let me end on this story because I think it's so beautiful. So these were cannibalistic tribes in Papua New Guinea. And once again, they weren't eating flesh for nutrition. They were eating it to capture their enemies within themselves. It was like the ultimate destruction of the other, to encapsulate them and their soul and their essence into your group. And so these missionaries go into this tribe, and there's these 2 competing tribes. And as this missionary is trying to share the gospel with these cannibals, he finally gets to the story of Judas betraying Jesus in the garden. And when the missionary got to the part where Judas betrayed Jesus with a kiss, the entire tribe got up and started dancing and singing and just going, woo! Like that was the greatest thing they had ever heard in their life. That they deceived Jesus with a kiss because treachery was one of their highest ideals. Good God, how do you become a missionary of the gospel to a tribe whose highest ideal is treachery and violence and murder? And so this missionary is just going, God, what am I supposed to do? And they had this ongoing warfare. It's very eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Like if someone in your tribe got killed, and it didn't even have to be by the other tribe. Because they were animist, every death, there was no coincidence. If you had a baby die in its crib, it's because the witch doctor or the witch or sorcerer from that tribe put a spell on your child, and you need to go, whether that happened or not, that's what they would assume. And so it was exhausting both these tribes because they were in a constant, perpetual state of warfare. And in both these tribes, they had similar cultures. The only way to stop this type of feuding was for the chief of one tribe to give his son to the other tribe. And when the missionary heard that, he was like, oh my God, it's the gospel peace child. And he used that to explain to him Jesus was that sacrifice to bring reconciliation between these God and man. And that's what I meant by how he used culture, but he had to learn the culture. He had to learn the language. He had to learn their history, their traditions. But once he did that, he was able to take their own values and beliefs, not the corrupt ones, but the ones that were still slightly aligned, and he used that to introduce the gospel. And another interesting thing about these tribal conversions, which is very different than our Western individualistic mentality, because we're really big into this personal, I personally received Jesus. When these tribes convert, they usually do it collectively because they have like a collective mind and identity. And so that really took me a while to wrap my head around because I was like, well, how can that be a real conversion? The chief converts and the whole tribe converts, but it's not like that. It's like they are of like one mind, they're so connected. We're so siloed in our culture. Is that interesting? Any other questions or comments?
That's in the book, Very Hard, what you just described.
That's the Peace Child book. That's his other book. They also made a movie of it. It's quite awesome. What's it?
What's the movie called?
Peace Child.
Oh, okay.
I bet it's on internet by this time. Any other cultural questions you'd like to ask or before I let you go? Okay, tomorrow I'm going to end with a talk on trees. Yeah. It's been so fun. Thank you for wanting that. And if I have a little time left after, it's only like an hour session tomorrow I have. Does that sound right? I would like to read you a few of my favorite passages from the Tao Te Ching, and that would be a nice way to end. And if it's okay, I'm going to hang out a couple days because it's a treat for me being up here. And I do need to get down before the next, I think I have like a little window Saturday between storms so that I can sneak down the mountain. All right. Thank you, guys. Yes?